Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Keith Whittier, and welcome to episode 5 of Let's Talk Racism. I'm extremely happy and proud of the support that this is gaining. Thank you so much. If you've already checked out some of these videos, and if you haven't, please go back and do so. Today we are going to be joined by Dr. Jenny Kay Dupuis. This is somebody that has been a friend of mine for many years, and I really appreciate her perspective. She's a best-selling author. She's also a proud member of the Indigenous community, and she's going to be giving a lot of different perspectives on her thoughts on what's been going on. She's also going to talk about what she thinks can be done to help curb racism. I think of it as a prescription. Ladies and gentlemen, this is episode 5.
Ladies and gentlemen, the conversation continues. I'm very excited to say the doctor is in. I am so incredibly proud of our next guest. She is not only a doctor, she is not only a best-selling author. She's not only somebody that I've known for so many years. How long? So many we stopped counting. I've always loved talking to her. I'm very excited that she's joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jenny Kay Dupuis. Jenny, how are you?
Good. I'm doing well, Keith. How are you?
Not too bad at all, thanks. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me tonight. I really appreciate it. Now, when all of this craziness started happening in the United States, sparked by the completely unnecessary death of George Floyd, you were one of the first people I thought of, reached out to you, and I'm so glad that you were able to find the time for us to have this conversation. But before we jump into that, of course, we are in the midst of a pandemic. How are you doing? How's everything going with you?
I've been doing well, actually. I've worked full time, so I've been busy with that. And then I've been doing some leather crafts on the side and making purses. It's kind of a fun hobby for me, and also doing a bit of writing. So for my next book.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. I wish you all the best with that, and I can't wait to hear more about that.
Thanks.
Um, so, of course, so many of us are completely, shocked and frustrated and saddened, and so many different emotions in regards to the tragic events surrounding George Floyd. When you heard the news and seeing the video, what was your reaction to this?
I think first of all, it's the word tragic comes to mind. Um, the word anger, I think, as well comes to mind. Also confusion, I think, as well too, because at the time I don't think I really understood the full complexities.
Mhm.
And when I was listening to the news and also hearing discussions unfold on social media, you realize the words racism are coming to the forefront. The words or the concepts of police brutality is coming to the forefront as well, and
Mhm.
conversations unfolding around that. Um, so it really pushed me to start reflecting and thinking about um, the lives that have been lost over many generations, the lives that have been stolen over many generations, and I started really thinking about that.
Now, this situation unfortunately isn't new. We've seen events like this before, but we seem to be having a moment where a lot of different businesses, a lot of different people who might not have reacted strongly to this before, are all taking a moment, and there seems to be a lot of unity. And obviously, there's a lot of protesting going on, a lot of peaceful protesting going on. There's a lot of discussion. Major companies are putting out statements. What do you think it is about this situation that's so different from the others we've seen?
I almost wonder if social media has had like a big impact on it. The initial videos that came out, they were horrific, they were traumatic, but also you saw videos of people gathering, thousands of people gathering all over the world in various cities, and those people were expressing, not just grief, but they were experiencing various different different levels of emotion, of frustration and anger, um, and people just seemed to be tired that nothing was being done, that justice hasn't been taken, and I think that's what I was kind of thinking about when I was, watching this all unfold.
Mhm. No, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I want to slightly pivot, but I'm going to bring it back to the conversation. Now, I'm familiar with your book. Can you just take a moment and tell people about your the wonderful book that you put out a few years ago?
Yeah, so about 4 years ago, um, I released a book about my grandmother's experience. I'm from a First Nation community. My First Nation community is called Nipissing First Nation, and it's located in Ontario. And um, in uh, in 1928, there was an Indian agent who came to our community, who was well known, and took my grandmother and her other siblings north to a residential school. And the intent of those residential schools, which were located all across Canada, were to strip away the culture, to strip away the language, to strip away their identity. And I felt it was an important story to share, because I had grown up for so many years in silence, not hearing about the histories, wasn't talked about in schools. Um, and I just felt it was an important conversation to start. And using children's literature was one way or one approach that I felt that I could help to start that conversation.
And obviously, the book went on to be extremely successful. And I also understand that you wanted the book to be written in your grandmother's language as well.
That's correct. So it was part of revitalization, which I thought was important as well. It's a dying language. There's a few people that speak it fluently, Anishinaabe. So I worked with my community, members from my community who were fluent speakers, as well as teachers, to help with the translation. So it was a very big emotional process for them to help to document that.
Mhm.
Um, I think stories like these are really important because they also start conversations that often people don't have or don't think about that could happen through children's literature.
Mhm.
Students realizing, what's the difference between what's right or wrong. Them asking questions about, why would they take the children? Why would people create policies against people? Those kind of things. And kids starting, as young as 7 years old, have been having these conversations through
Mhm.
that type of literature.
Now, I'm going to tell you that I was not, admittedly, was not familiar with the residential school system up until several years ago when I saw a film called Indian Horse, which very powerful film, which blew me away. I was going to the Toronto Film Festival one year, and a friend here in Ottawa said you have to see this film, and I'm very very glad that I did. Now, um, as it relates to what's going on currently, and this is why I wanted to talk about this, is that one part of the narrative that we often hear in society is, you know, that there's a concern from an educational standpoint in terms of what's being taught. And I have to say that when I identify sources of racism, to me, there's a couple of places without question that I look to. One is within the home. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but you see kids of all ethnicities, young kids playing in harmony. It isn't until they're taught to hate and they're taught that they should have certain prejudgments and certain feelings about different races that their mentality starts to turn. But the other aspect is in our educational system. I don't necessarily think that our educational system, like, I'm not trying to call all the teachers out there racist. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is I believe that there are gaps in terms of what is being taught and what's not being taught. So, for example, I feel that your book, and this is not me pandering to you because you're my friend and because you're here, I feel your book should be in every school. This is something that needs to be taught. These are things that people need to know because it is a part, not a wonderful part, but it is a part of Canadian history in terms of what was happening at residential schools. But I also feel that people need to have more respect and appreciation on the Indigenous community.
Yeah, it's an important conversation to have. I think when it comes to diversity overall, when we talk about the education system, that there is a responsibility that lies within the education system, basically around the world,
Mm-hmm.
for people to understand people's histories, people's perspectives, people's diverse perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that, there's some education systems that are doing a relatively good job with, or they're making efforts to do a good job with, and there's ones that are still struggling. It really comes down, though, to, in my thinking, it really comes down to the educators themselves
Mm-hmm.
and how much effort that they're putting into to really explore those concepts and to be able to identify, where they need to draw connections to, whether it's in history or geography or science or math. Diversity could be brought into any subject area. But really, what I think is that educators really need to ask themselves, what the intent of these systems are, and that's to really prepare students to be culturally competent and responsive, in terms of thinking about how they're going to interact with others in a very respectful, meaningful way without oppressing others. So literature can actually help, and there's some really fantastic lists that have been coming out in the last couple of weeks that have been shared by booksellers or by even educators themselves, librarians, that have been circulating social media, some of them actually going viral, not just specific to Indigenous realities, but various diverse realities around the world as well too. But through those, when you pick up those books and the way that you teach them and the way that you initiate conversations, you can really start to teach and model language, appropriate language. And you could also really help to break apart the histories. You can talk about and spot the injustices, and then also thinking about power imbalances and where it all went wrong, and what can we do in terms of action, because eventually those young people will eventually go up and grow up and eventually take spaces in various institutions which people question right now, when we talk about institutional racism that exists or systemic racism that exists. They could technically be part of the change.
No, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that you hear from time to time is, you hear it in the States, and you definitely hear it here in Canada as well from time to time. I mean, there's that old quote where it's like, there's this wonderful app out there's this wonderful app out to figure out which one of your friends are racist, and it's called Facebook, and it's somewhat accurate. I see a lot of comments. So, for example, when Prime Minister Trudeau was bringing in Syrian refugees, well, why do we have to take them? Why don't they go back to where they're from? Or you might be in like different places, maybe something at a grocery store, something at the DMV, wherever, Walmart, just insert place, and you hear that, go back to where you're from. I have always had trouble with that. First of all, the majority of people that are saying that are white people, and with all due respect, their families at some point have immigrated from some other place. Looking at you, my Indigenous friend, is that something that just frustrates you beyond end? Because I know myself, sure, I was born and raised here, but my parts come from Trinidad, I'm very proud to say, but I never understood, and I think as much as people might say that flippantly, to me that is blatant racism. Like, that's racism at its core, when you have this us and them mentality, and it riles me up. So I'm just wondering, for yourself, so somebody who's like extremely proud of their heritage, when there are other people that are saying that, because you've never said that. That's not something that has ever come up in any sort of conversation we've had, and we've known each other for a long time, so long we've stopped counting how long.
20 plus years.
But like, is that something that just drives you crazy? I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really disrespectful statement. For me, it's considered a racial insult. Sometimes I wonder if it's actually would be border on the levels of harassment or bullying, depending on how people use it. And it's sometimes even, I would consider it almost a dismissive statement, like somebody dismissing my identity or someone else's identity, and also somebody else's histories. Like, no one knows, someone's past, or how long that they've been in a country, or what they've contributed to nationhood building, right? But it's really, for me, I've heard it for sure. I've heard it in workplaces. I've heard it in education systems where I've gone to school. Heard it in shopping centers. So it's nothing new to me that I've heard, either people saying it to me, or hearing it said to other people as well too. And I think what it does, it creates this really unsafe space, right? Like, that's what I think of it that way, right? And I always think of those types of conversations that create hurt for sure there's racism within that too, but I think people have to really reflect on the feelings that come with it. I can talk about all the theories about racism or anti-racism or anything, but to me, it really comes down to the hurt that it creates and how it can really break apart someone's identity or self, their feelings of their self-esteem, their confidence, and everything, and what that can do to a person. So I think it's important that people really do confront it if they can, if they're in a safe space to confront it, and try to find ways to really work through those emotions. And that's something that I've had to do on numerous occasions when people try to break me down for whatever reason, is really to stand strong and realize those statements are often coming from people that are often broken. That's the way that I've kind of looked at it now. And also, I think now that I feel in a safer space, that I feel more confident in myself, that often I look to hold people accountable too for when they make statements like that I will speak up and yeah. But not everybody can, right?
Yeah.
Depending on their own situation.
No, it's fair. I appreciate that. As I mentioned earlier, we're having what I'm calling a moment right now in terms of what's happening globally. We are seeing major companies are pausing and not just putting out statements, but having conversations within their organizations. We're seeing a lot of that happening recently, and I know that a lot of people have reached out to me and wanting to start the conversation and things of that nature, and not pretending to understand what it's like, but wanting to try to understand and wanting to help. What do you say to people who are coming or who would come to you and say, hey, what can I do to help? What can I do to help eradicate this? Because again, this to me isn't something that is going to go away overnight. This is something to me that the same way that racism can be taught, I believe it can be untaught if people are willing to learn. But for
Certainly.
those people who are willing to learn, what I mean, I'm talking to the doctor, but that's my prescription, you know. So for those people who are willing to learn, what do you say to them? Where
Well, I
can
think
they start? What can they do?
self-education is a good place to start. Um, just even scrolling the news and seeing what's out there and what's going on in the world, and keeping your eyes open, about the inequalities and the injustices that do exist. But then also, thinking about what your role can be. As an educator, I know what my role could be. Somebody that may work in police services, they may identify things that need to change, possibly with them, or wherever somebody is in their position in life. I think they have to sort of think about that whole concept of that justice is needed, accountability is needed, community trust is needed, structural change is needed, and ethical leadership is needed as well. There's some really good examples out there of people that are more so, I'd say, in the last couple of weeks, that are really reflecting on their positions and how that they can potentially make change, whether it's trying to address pay equity, whether it's trying to step back themselves from leadership positions and make space, for diverse peoples to have the voice or opportunity. Also thinking about the way people are developing policies, and how can people open the doors to include diversity, or even, instead of just making the anti-racism statement, or we will not condone, it's looking and reviewing all of the policies within. So, but I think everybody can do something. But it definitely has to start with self-education, and also a long-standing commitment to it, and also be willing to speak up and point it out, and be and create those safe spaces so that other people can speak up as well too about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the statements and the calling it out is really table stakes. But I think, to your point, I think it comes with policies. I think it's in terms of making sure that things are more equal and things are more diverse, in the classrooms, in the boardrooms, like in every aspect of life. It shouldn't be, okay, well, we need to fill a quota. It should be, we need to make sure that we're hiring the best people. We need to make sure that we're educating the next generation on all different aspects, and not just kind of selling them this like one particular story and for lack of a better term, like whitewashing it and not putting out different perspectives. I love reading, and I love, understanding different things. But I said that growing up, I didn't learn anything about Martin Luther King in a classroom. Like, I'm talking to you now, and I'm fully confessing I was not aware of residential schools until a few years ago from a movie. So there's definitely some gaps, and there's definitely some opportunities there. Like, listen, I love William Shakespeare. Every year in high school, I read or reread a William Shakespeare play. I can't say that that's ever like really come in handy on the job. I'm just saying, no disrespect to Shakespeare, he's great, but I'm just saying, let's mix that up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think there's
There
definitely
are
some
some
challenges
good
with the curriculum.
examples. Yeah, I think there are some good examples when you look across, particularly Canada, and the way some of the literature is being introduced into the schools, whether it's actual separate courses that have been created for that, or opportunities where people are creating book lists and then holding professional learning to support that. It's not happening in all the places, but there are examples of that happening more and more. The thing that I did want to point out, though, is you can do all this work, but the reality is, if it's not a safe space, like, everybody has to be on board, because otherwise it's not a safe space, and you're bringing in diversity, you're bringing in equity, you're bringing in inclusion and all this stuff into it. But the people that have to walk in those doors, to help to support that, referring to whether it's diverse employees or students or whatever the case is, they're carrying already a lot of baggage, and it's got to be a very, very safe environment,
Yeah.
and a comfortable environment as well too.
Are you like me? Do you take some, I don't know if pride's the right word, but kind of, do you feel that this situation is very different in that when you look at situations, I could go back to Rodney King and then all the way up to Trayvon Martin, there seemed to be a rinse and repeat type of situation where it just kind of, we talked about it for a little while, there was a lot of anger, and then it kind of went away. Whereas this, when you look at the protesting that's going around globally, you are seeing people of all ethnicities that are protesting. There's a huge global outrage that is coming from all communities. Do you feel that with this situation being different, there might be some potential for change, or do you think that this is just, the protest is just lasting a little longer, and then we might go back into a rinse repeat situation?
I think there's a lot of hope. Like, I have a lot of hope for change. I also have a lot of hope that even the current realities that Indigenous peoples face as well too. We've had some situations here in Canada that haven't really been profiled on a global scale to the degree that the recent situations have, but definitely I think people are starting to take a look at it. But I have hope, and I think that's all I'm just going to leave it as, is I
That's
have
fair.
hope.
Yeah.
But it's disheartening when you experience and you live that up and down all the time, where it's suddenly you think that the people around you really do want to make change, and they're kind of your biggest supporters, but then you're right, 6 months later, suddenly all these people disappear, or they change their positions and they've moved on, and then new people are coming in, and um, it's it's scary. It's really scary, but I do have hope. So, yeah.
Well, I share in your hope for now, and I definitely see where you're coming from. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking with my friend, Dr. Jenny Kay Dupuis, best-selling author of I Am Not a Number. If you haven't read it yet, go out and buy it. You can get it on Amazon, Indigo, Chapters, anywhere that books are sold. You know why? Because she's best-selling. Jenny, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me tonight. It is always a pleasure talking to you. I always appreciate your perspective. And I continue to wish you nothing but the best. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, you take care. Bye now.